The ancient pythia, persons of the dialogue, the oracle, Lycia, Socrates, Ste. Scene: modern-day Greece, the Castilia Springs. Lycia and Ste are on holiday in Delphi. After visiting the ancient temple, they walk along the terraces of the spring. Passing along the tree-shaded path, Ste cries out, tripping over a slight rise in a jutting paving stone. "Wait, Lycia, there's something buried there, glinting." Scene: he dislodges the path stone and pries up a round black sphere the size of a small grapefruit. "Oh, I've never seen anything like that." "Me either. It looks a bit like it's made from a smoked glass, although at second glance there seems to be something moving in it." "Let me see." "Be careful, it's quite heavy." "I see it. It looks like swirling mists of smoke. I wonder if..." Scene: phone ringtone. On call. "It's making a noise." Seer. Translation from the ancient Greek. "Greetings, I am the Oracle of Delphi." "What is it? Wow, really? Is it really a phone to ancient Greece? I can understand now why everyone thinks of them as so clever." "Steve, the Oracle is asking who you want to speak to." "Fuck, really? I've always wanted to talk to Socrates. Is he there?" "Yes, the Oracle has gone to get him." "This is really amazing, actually being able to talk to Socrates. It's a dream come true. As you know, I've studied ancient Greek at school, but I never heard that they were so artful as to make a telephone that could talk across time." "I know, what a find. Wait, is that him now in the midst of the sphere? I think I can see his face." Ancient noises. "Socrates." "Yes. Tell me what you want to tell him, and I will tell him what you are asking." "Thank you, Lycia. Wow. Well, where do I begin? Well, say this, we're about 2,400 years ahead of him." "He says he knows that." Well, tell him that he's been my hero for years, and I've read all of Plato's writings of him, and I greatly admire his mind." "He says thank you, and assumes you must be interested in philosophy." "Oh yes, tell him very much." "Well, what do you want to ask him?" "Well, quite a lot. I'm afraid I haven't quite formulated all of the questions yet. But to start with, ask him if he thought after 2.5 millennia society would still be struggling with most of the same problems he does in his day." Scene: Steve presses his face closer to the sphere. Socrates: the questions of philosophy are timeless. Therefore it is unsurprising that your questions are relevant to your time. Progress in philosophy can only be made conventionally with unconventional thinking. "Oh yes, Socrates, you mean progress is achieved through dialectic." "I am talking of conventional belief. Dialectic is a good way to challenge thinking and awaken lost knowledge." "So we still have the same problems all this time later because we have not challenged our conventional beliefs sufficiently." "Many within the population have views which hinder their ability to grow and make the mental reflections that are necessary to illuminate their soul's purpose." "Right, in Plato's dialogues you're always asking people what they knew about various subjects, and much of the time they would not admit that they did not know what they claimed to know, but even worse, they thought they knew something that was later shown to be false." "Yes. And your greatest knowledge is admitting not knowing something you do not know. I think some of the problems are that what would seem to be required is an unwavering honesty with oneself." "Yes, that is true." It is also highlighting the relationship of virtues and values with cause and effect, because to have knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you will act upon it at all. If someone knows something, why would they not act in knowledge of it? If I know I am thirsty and water will quench my thirst, I will drink. "Oh yes, Socrates, I agree, but I think that your knowledge has times when it cannot be enacted, certainly when it applies to questions where the truth is vaguely perceived and the demands of its clarity are less sought. So someone may know that they do not know an answer, but pretend that they do to hide their ignorance and appear wise, would it not be foolish and certainly not wise to be shown that you do not know something that you claim to know? Well, yes, of course, but where the truth is hard to determine, someone may assume no one else is sure, and therefore the deception may never be known, and it would be possible for them to bluff their audience. You think that they value their appearance more than honesty. It is certainly a question of character, but I only want to highlight the interrelationship of values and virtues, how the values one holds and to some extent one's virtues affect the values that are held. The question of why something is valued is interesting anyway. It seems to me to involve the prioritization of different assessments that have different goals, that result in the value of the held value. Do you mean why someone values something? Well, yes, the basis of the two assessments, I think, can be called instrumental value, where the value is derived for some other end, such as money. Money is not what is actually desired, but what can be bought with that value. And the other type of value I call intrinsic, something valued for itself. For example, beautiful scenery. I value it because it is beautiful and enjoy its beauty, but for no other reason. Although beauty may be valued for instrumental reasons too, for what it will get you or what it can give you, but I think its true value is intrinsic. Goodness, truth and beauty are alike, but why then would someone value appearance more than truth? Because of love of a good appearance is a vice? I think so. Well, it was one of the points you discussed with Protagoras, that no one knowingly chooses vice, since a vice will entrap them, harming them. The vice is chosen through persuasion, compulsion, delusion or ignorance, but all the choices someone makes are made to achieve the good, and they believe that their choices will give the best outcomes, not bad ones. And you believe that someone's values will lead them to acquire vice or virtues? Well, I think so, yes. Although I have noticed that values and their loves can have a curiously circular existence. To love something is to value it, and to value something is to love it. But do you think that really applies to vice? Suppose someone values stealing. Would they say that they love stealing, or is it not rather the goods acquired through stealing that they love? Yes, Socrates, you're right. It doesn't really seem to work so clearly for vices as it does for virtues. I think because all the goods of vice are desired in the instrumental mindset, intrinsically vice's nature is to avoided by everyone. There is a philosopher and psychologist in this time called Ian McGilchrist. He wrote a book called The Matter with Things, presenting evidence and argument for a dual perspective and perception existing in everyone that arises or is from the consequence of a physically divided brain. According to the theory, one side is focused on inanimate material, the use of tools and what can be gained from the environment, while the other side of the divided brain is observing our existence within the world, trying to understand and appreciate its meaning. Therefore, in the light of that theory, instrumental value is largely the realm of the first perspective, and intrinsic value that of the second. It would further follow that vice is the consequence of the domination or prioritization of the first perspective, the instrumentally governed. The second is less vulnerable because it only seeks the thing in itself. McGilchrist hypothesizes that the affinities of each perspective are tied to and flow from their functional tasks. But what I find fascinating about our real experience is how, where and why of their unity. We experience a structured balance of these two different perspectives because for nearly all the time I have one clear self that I perceive as unity, not two separate antagonistic selves. Nonetheless, all this is simply to say that it is a matter of attention to each perspective that will lead one to value something, be it truth, beauty, justice, stealing, fraud or murder. I agree that a narrowness of attention will restrict a discernment of outcomes, but is this the misvaluation you speak of, more than a restricted view? Because I'm reminded of the conversation I had with Protagoras, where we discussed the possibility of virtue being a teachable value or thing. I don't know, Socrates, but I'd very much like to continue that discussion where it broke off. Good, perhaps we can start by examining a definition of virtue. Virtue is the term used to describe thoughts and actions that gain the best possible outcomes for all concerned. It is an acceptable definition. Great, while I do not think we are in any doubt that virtue can be learnt, I am sure that there is doubt whether it can be taught. Why? Well, I'm thinking of the difficulty in teaching certain qualities to a student such that they might become a genius or a great artist's creator. Clearly it is true that the essential techniques of an art can be taught, but when it comes to the creation of a masterpiece, technique by itself is not enough. I see. You think virtue is an art? Well, like poetry or music, yes, there is some aspect of the creative act that cannot be reduced to a teachable technique. You alluded to that when questioning Protagoras' claims to be able to teach virtue. It seems to me one quality of the embodied virtue is like that of an artistic genius, which cannot be taught, only discerned by the individual attempting to embody it. I think it is probably because that the genius is doing, or what the genius is doing, is taking a vast, largely disconnected set of values and information and somehow making sense of it, which cannot be achieved with a set of related simple rules, because the dynamic breadth, complexity and the apparent conflict of certain duties in the case of virtue, such as your example of justice, returning borrowed weapons to a friend, which obviously one should do but should not do if the friend has gone insane. It would not be an act of justice to give the weapons back to someone who had gone mad, even if they were owed. Yes. What then do you think the requirement of virtues are? I'm not completely sure, Socrates, but I think but I will tell you how it seems to me, and I am willing to be corrected if you think what I suggest is not true. Good. The best understanding I have of the requirements, acquisition and retention of virtue is knowledge of values, virtues in society. I think these aspects are the ones that can be taught, and like an academic discipline, could be taught. Discernment is the application of knowledge, discernment to a given scenario or situation. I do not think that this can be taught necessarily, only encouraged to develop through experience of real life and real situations. And then self-control, which is essentially the implementation of discernment's understanding and knowledge when the action to be taken is difficult or painful, but must nevertheless be carried out to result in the best outcomes for all concerned. Such behaviour could not be taught. I see it as more of a personal disposition than anything else that cannot be abstracted or symbolically explained. So with the exception of the basic knowledge, all a teacher might do is encourage virtues acquisition. So you think as I do that the unexplained life is not worth living? Yes, Socrates. Reflecting on form and structure of our lives is vital if we are to know who we actually are and hopefully know others. Modern society here calls the practice meditation. So if we are to improve ourselves, we must reflect on our knowledge. But what are we really looking for? What is knowledge? Well, Socrates, I think there are two types of knowledge: book knowledge and action knowledge. Knowledge of this second sort is know-how knowledge. It is learnt only by the individual themselves, in a way similar to the idea of the artistic genius. There are techniques relating to an action, a list of procedures for example, that can be taught, but their actual implementation in action can only be learnt by the person. I think McGilchrist's split perspective theory is also relevant here, because he says one view is embodied in the present now, while the other is abstracted from the present and focused on the past or the future. I think this may give insight into one of the reasons for a split of perspectives. One allows a real grounding in the present, while the other relates to the metaphysical concepts to the present moment, a necessary divide to reach out in time from the demands and restrictions of the present moment. Does that mean you think knowledge is an abstraction? I think book knowledge is, definitely, and why it can be communicated and taught, but action knowledge is different. It is not capable of abstraction for the most part, but but must be embodied in the person in the present, which is why it can not be taught. Only the aspects that can be abstracted in techniques can be communicated and taught. In the talk you had with Theaetetus, the final definition of knowledge was discussed as true justified belief. And as you mentioned, how can a justification be verified, valid, when you do not know the truth? And if the truth be known, a justification is really irrelevant. So the definition is unsatisfactory. McGilchrist says that knowledge requires a step of faith, and that knowledge is known only from the inside. In my opinion, knowledge is the understanding of truths, ideas, structured patterns gained from investigation, observation and experience. I would like to add the qualifier of veridical, but on consideration it seems to me to run into the same problems as Theaetetus' justification of true belief. If it is true, it is veridically true. If not, it is false. Therefore it is an irrelevant qualifier. It is not only a definition I am looking for, but the knowledge of knowledge. The knowledge of knowledge. Whoa. And how can we talk about something unknown? You're thinking if we have the knowledge of knowledge, then we will be able to avoid all the mistaken knowledge perceived or abstracted. Yes, that is what I would like to know. Is there a fact of knowledge which in all cases is always true, a single distinguishing feature that all knowledge has, and by which all knowledge may be known? Surely that distinguishing feature is truth, Socrates. Yes, but if it is true or not doesn't help in the case of mistaken knowledge. I'm assuming you mean the example you gave Theaetetus. When someone reckons 11 to be 5 plus 7. Yes, but doesn't the truth show that it is mistaken knowledge because it is thought to be 11 when the truth is 12? It shows there is not a true understanding such that a mistake could never be made, without which only opinion exists, not knowledge. I see what you are saying, Socrates. Someone who claims knowledge should never be mistaken in their claims about what they claim to know. Yes. You see that knowledge cannot be sensation or opinion with definition or explanation of difference. Wow, that's really Zen. Zen? No one has told me about Zen. Oh no, it's a bit irrelevant really. It's kind of existentialism, Eastern philosophy of the Tao, a type of Buddhism. They have all these logical paradoxical sayings and stories designed to inspire the listener beyond the literal and superficial to enlightenment. But similar to our discussion showing that whatever knowledge actually is, it is beyond our abilities to know, and hence we must be a lot more careful to designate knowledge when we cannot even give an adequate explanation of it. You truly are a great philosopher, Socrates, perhaps one of the greatest who has ever been. Oh, you go too far. I'm only asking a few simple questions. Oh, of course, and they're very good questions too. I'm glad you think so. I wonder if I may ask you a question. What is it? Where do thoughts exist? And where do I go when I am asleep? Thoughts exist in your mind, and when asleep you return to the astral plane. But I'm not aware of my mind existing anywhere but in and around my body, with the occasional exception of dreams. You know that reality has 3 dimensions. Yes. Well, suppose there is an additional 4th dimension. This could be where the mind exists. Okay, but what about the breaking continuity of awareness when sleeping? When I'm awake, I'm free to recall all of my experience, yet when asleep, all that I can recall are fragments of dreams, and these are mostly very hazy. Well, could it not be that your body is asleep, and therefore not disposed to the formation of memories? Well, yes, I suppose it could be that. But do you think the body is... But you think the body is a prison anyway, don't you? I have thought so, whilst the constant and innumerable demands for satisfaction have been fresh in my mind. Yes, all physical things are restricted in space and time. I have heard others say that we were imprisoned in a body, but no one has satisfactorily shown what crime we have committed. Supposedly it is because our most distant ancestors were banished from paradise because they learnt the difference between good and evil, but I cannot see how one could be alive and not be aware of the difference between good and evil. It seems to be empty explanation, inconsistent with the logical facts of existence. What if it were a time... What if it were a time without evil? Well, on that interpretation, it sort of says that in the act of knowing the existence of good and evil, evil was brought into being, which says the Creator set up the circumstances that would bring it into being by forbidding that particular type of knowledge, suggesting the evil was actually in and from the Creator. Indeed, must be, because how can a completely good world create an evil one? Or even a half-evil one? How can good create evil? Or how can light create darkness? By absence? Oh yeah, right. But a bit of a poor analogy, I suppose. Well, how can good create evil then? I'm not sure if the good truly is good, because good can only come from good. Right, but there it is. Either evil exists in the Creator, which is impossible since it is good, but But by absence, as in the light analogy, evil exists like shadows awaiting illumination. Disorder is the absence of good order, presumably, and the body is a prison with the absence of light. I suppose so, Socrates. Seems somewhat paradoxical still. Could be like the way that nothing repels everything. Is that so? Well, nothing is the absence of everything, although everything includes nothing insofar as nothing can be called a thing, and yet nothing is essential for something to exist. I am again reminded of McGilchrist's work on the differences of brain hemispheres and different perspectives from each. He says the abstracted conceptual point of view often gets into trouble when analysing self-referential statements. Universal and incommensurable differences, like the ratio between radius and circumference, results in a number we know goes beyond 20,000 decimal places and theoretically to infinity. You are speaking of Zeno, of Elia's paradoxes? Well, yes, partly. McGilchrist argues that not all truths are equal, and it is a lack of context or degree to a truth that can often turn it into a paradox, but also the process of serial and retrospective analysis can produce many of them. He says that a desire for an interpretation that is unambiguously correct at all temporal points may create paradoxes and reveal the handicaps on a certain decontextualized, over-precise way of looking at the world. He gives some examples from Zeno and others. One is called the unexpected examination. A teacher announces to his class at the beginning of the week that he will submit them to an unexpected examination. But apparently this can never occur. This is because it cannot happen on a Friday, because by Friday, having not happened, it would obviously be expected. But it cannot take place on Thursday, because this is now the last day that it could happen, and the same reasoning applies to the following days until it logically cannot happen on any day. So once the serial logic shows that no day can be the unexpected day, then any day now can be the unexpected day, highlighting another curious paradox with that line of thinking in apparent certainties. The logical expectation of certainty removes the very thing that it attempts to discover and replaces it with its opposite, because now the unexpected day can be any given the previous use of logic, which says that none of the days could be the day of the test because they are all expected. Retrospective analysis produces a further problem. A philosopher called Kierkegaard asks, where is the necessary resting point in life for us to fully reflect on life and understand what is happening? The point is that logical philosophy stops time and represents it retrospectively, and McGilchrist says in reality we experience the world as it happens in the flow of time, and so it can be understood in the sense used by analytic philosophy outside of time, and so it cannot be understood. McGilchrist is a very great philosopher. Well, I think so. Zeno's paradoxes create the same weakness from retrospective analysis, such as Achilles and the tortoise, where despite being many times faster than the tortoise, Achilles cannot ever overtake the tortoise because of infinite regress in analysis. What is happening there is represented mathematically in the infinite series: 1 plus a half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus a 16th and so on, to an infinity of fractions which never quite reaches 2. Achilles can never get to the tortoise that way. I think something else that is also highlighted and is interesting about this can be seen with the infinite series, and that is, it is equal to 2, as we know. But we cannot know that from the infinite number of fractional additions because they are infinite. It would take all time to be able to confirm that way that it is 2. It is known only by intuition. But you would say remembering, I presume, Socrates. Yes, it is regaining the forgotten knowledge of the forms. Well, yeah, McGilchrist says that the intuitive side, the one remembering forgotten knowledge, is from the right hemisphere of our brains. The hemisphere theory is kind of his life's work. Anyway, for further illustrations of the difference, imagine a line. Yes. Find a point on it. Yes. It is a retrospective action. Yet a line cannot be made of such points, even an infinity of them, since by definition a point means without an extension. Any extension makes it into a small line. True. Similarly with time, as you may recall in the anatomy of change paradox, that an object at rest begins to move. At the instance when the movement starts, is it at rest or is it in motion? Yes, I am not sure what to say about that. It may be neither at rest or in motion, but a third state on the moment of starting. But Socrates, as we saw with the line, a span of time cannot be broken down into instants, because as soon as any instant has a temporal thickness, it is a span of time, meaning there can be further instances along it. Instances are a mental or logical device we use to designate particulars on an undifferentiated continuum or continuity. They are entirely imaginary, as with Zeno's paradox of the arrow. When the arrow occupies a place just its own size, it is at rest. At every moment during its flight, the arrow occupies a place just its own size. Thus, at every moment of its flight, the arrow is at rest and never moves. But we all see that it does move. McGilchrist quotes another philosopher called Melroche. Zeno's paradoxes show that continuity cannot be composed of discrete elements. Yes, it would seem to be so. I call it stickiness of consciousness as resultant. Similarities exist within the Sortes paradox. McGilchrist says precision and status are highlighted against the other view of imprecision and evolution. Yes, I know the Sortes paradox. One grain of rice is not a heap. At no point does adding a grain of rice make the difference between being a heap and not. Yet, after adding many grains, there is a heap. Right, it demonstrates an imprecision in our natural language. Yes, it is something that has troubled me for many years. McGilchrist says that as far as the logical analysis perspective is concerned, this is because we have not thought clearly enough about it. Hence, sticky consciousness's tendency to get stuck to its own values, in this case precision, and unable to recognise the mode of thinking is inappropriate for the task. He goes on to say that there is no room for a partial consent. It is getting to be something we would call a heap, because the logical perspective wants an either or answer, like a computer whose basic language is a code of either yes or no. Either it is or it is not. Yes. But also the process of becoming a heap becomes a series of sharply delineated static events, and a heap cannot be recognised by enumerating its parts. It can only be seen as a whole. He also says there are philosophers who argue the principle of bivariance is true, that a proposition must be either true or false. Therefore there is a single grain of sand which makes the difference. It has not yet been found. It is tempting to assent, but it's clear no single grain, and then why there is a paradox. Yes, and brings us on to a related problem I am sure you are familiar with, the theory of forms, the problems that Parmenides showed with it. Yes, that for each form will require a further form of relation to encompass it and its instances. We call it the third man paradox. Fred and Harry are alike as men because they each share the qualities of the form of a man, which must itself have all the qualities that Fred and Harry have. Therefore, there are in fact three elements alike, Fred, Harry, and the form of a man. But how to explain their likeness? To do so invokes a further form, the superform of man, which explains the likeness of each. So now we have four, Fred, Harry, the form of a man, and the superform of a man, which relates them. Although of course now we need a fifth to explain the relation of the other four and how they related, and so on to infinity. Yes, the logic of absurdity refutes the theory of forms. There is another philosopher called Segru, who hypothesizes that you created the theory of forms in order to return coherence to thought that was undermined by the ontological pluralist thinkers such as Heraclitus, who looked at the world as a continuous and constant flux of things. The things of sense keep coming and going, constantly changing, and because of this view, the world appears as pure change, constantly becoming. We have no one thing for our thoughts to fix to. I am not sure that Heraclitus has been correctly interpreted, since the concern is based on too literal an interpretation of some of his sayings. Obviously, in the superficial sense, it is true that the measurable aspects of a river are constantly changing. Yet I think the interpretation he wanted to say was the constant change of waters create the river to stay at same self, which is a little more profound and likely statement from someone who is renowned for his poetic nuanced words and connects to his flux ideas about the unity of opposites, same and not same, and black and white, are completely opposite colours but are completely the same in being colours. Or as the philosopher Alan Watts says, there is no front side of a mountain without a backside. In any case, Segru sees the theory of forms as an attempt to hold the realm of the senses to a constant standard where illusions and impossibilities can no longer have their influence. Since Zeno's paradoxes show that sense perceptions are completely unreliable and unreal. Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. The arrow never actually moves, and your perception that it does is obviously wrong. Because if sense perceptions are all about illusions, like the cave myth, relativism, or man is the measure of all things, is irrefutable, since what I see is true for me, but not only for you, and vice versa, and not for you, vice versa. Sense cannot be foundational, but all we have to know reality, then we are lost and without hope of escape. Yes, the theory of forms is supposed to give us a unifying foundation for truth, wisdom and communications, but as you said, it's logically incomplete. Right, and McGilchrist thinks that this is because the abstract idea of the forms is being reified, basically turned into a real object. That is setting the representation as real and the real as representational, or trying to make the result of analytics equivalent to reality. It is the serial analytic thinking problem coupled with the belief that reality is made from discrete elements, which as we've shown it isn't. In trying to form connections between the elements, further connections are required, and so on and on and on. I see. What can replace it then? A replacement? Ah, yes. But I'm afraid that we must drop the serial analytic approach, Socrates. That type of epistemic approach, it would only work if we lived in a world that our modern philosophy calls realism. That is, that our senses are fully in touch with the external world. Sadly, they are not, which can be seen from the evidence of mistaken perception and personal variation of perceptions. I see a small tree, but someone else sees a large bush. I know what you mean, but what if it was all in the mind? Yes, but really no, that position is called idealism. While solving the epistemic problem, it raises all sorts of other problems by making all our perceptions relative to ourselves and degrading communication. If a further problem is that if all is mind, why is there distinction between mind and the world at all? Related is the distinction between the perception of a thing and its being and existence. Independent existence is required, otherwise you would simply see whatever you wanted to and the external world would behave much more like a dream, which is different from what we actually experience. The external world is very consistent in behaviour in simple ways like material consistency and structure, pressure mediation, energy balances and so on. I think it behaves in such a way because it is mostly independent of us. I say mostly because there are certain circumstances where our attention and attitude does influence what exists. It would seem to be impossible to say if our perception is actually changing what is there or not. More likely it is simply our perception of what is there that is changing, but exceptionally fine and delicate experiments would be required to determine the extent, and even then there is likely to be grey areas where it still remains indeterminate of us and it. You think that it is the nature of the universe? It seems to be that way, yes. I heard a philosopher called Kant make a distinction that our perception or observation of the external world is a phenomena and distinctly different from the unperceived real external world, the thing in itself, the noumenon, which could pretty much be anything. So when one looks at a rock, the phenomena is the perception in one's mind of the rock. The noumena is the rock in itself, whatever that is, unperceived. The phenomena and the noumenon is what the rock actually is. This is our reality, a balance and interplay of self and other. We can only know the world through the medium of our senses and mental perceptions, which means that there is no way of knowing what is actually out there, unmediated, without limitations, or any of the various distortions that our perceptions are highly vulnerable to. We cannot know what is behind or beyond our reality in this universe, and therefore it is impossible to acquire any absolute truth or knowledge of it. The only place certainty is possible is in our logical constructions that only exist in our minds and cannot be accurately applied to the world outside us. This exists in or they exist rather, in a unique fantasy, a world that in many ways is just like the real world that has been constructed from, and can to a limited extent be applied to certain areas of the real world such as geometry and physics. But even with those great cautions must be observed, lest we come to think that the constructions of our minds are how reality actually is, when it isn't. Many different problems and confusions have to do and will occur when it is forgotten that numbers, geometry, the operations of logics are all the products of a fantasy world, only tangentially connected to the real one. They are only our mind's attempt to represent what we see and experience into simple images that we can understand and analyse. Does this mean you think the epistemic project should be abandoned? No, please don't be downhearted, Socrates. It is true that we have here a very negative truth, showing that it is impossible for us to know the world truly, and that there will never be a method of acquiring complete truth, because we cannot get to what is beyond our senses, or that our ideas about the world can never get beyond intelligent guesswork. It is probably the worst news you've received. Believe me, I do not like it either, and I'm sorry to have to tell you. And of course the implications are that all opinions to a particular extent are valid. I would ask you not to despair. We will attempt to salvage something from this. Indeed, these facts now put temperance and humility of opinion on epistemically solid foundations, and if what you said about all virtues being one is true, if we have one, we should be able to find the others, then there's still hope. I trust that you may have suspected that the acquisition of knowledge and absolute truth might be a more difficult task than it first appears, because of our restricted and limited perspective. Philosophy is not always what you want it to be. I did have doubts about the acquisition of absolute truth, but I do not understand how you can be so certain we will never attain it. Well, you are wise, Socrates, and there may well be possibilities that could occur in the future that I do not know now that change the situation. However, I'm only speaking of what we know now, and as far as I can see, the only thing to do is rescue what we can from the project. I think the first being contemplation of an attitude of great humility towards the external world in the light of this new information, admitting that we know about the world only in a degree of opinion, and hence being on careful watch to observe contrary truths and never be dogmatic in our truth. I hear the truth of your words, yet I am unsatisfied. Yes, Socrates, it is a very strange, misleading, confusing and somewhat inexplicable universe. Well, let us say for the moment I accept what you say. Okay, where do we go from the humility that we know nothing and have no hope of knowing anything real? But Socrates, it's not quite as bad as that. You're overlooking yourself. I mean the I. The individual awareness we each have is not mediated. We have direct and truly knowable experience of ourselves, do we not? Oh yes. By that I think you mean absolute knowledge of the self may be possible. I can see no obstacle but our own selves. Yes, good. As the famous phrase says, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. Then it is clear we must inquire how and from where within ourselves this knowledge will come. I agree. Well then, what is the I that asks and answers questions? Well, Socrates, I think consciousness, though a vague and imprecise term, it is the predominant feature of I. To me, it means awareness, and is the only evidence that an I exists at all, but also it seems to me to be an awareness of an awareness, the self-awareness, being both subject and object at the same time. It is an aspect which is thought to separate us from most animals, although experiments using a mirror and something that marks the face of the creature, have shown that elephants and orangutans, as well as a few other species, are self-aware, because those animals notice the change, the mark on their face reflected in a mirror held up to them by trying to remove the mark from their face. Self-awareness has a curious feature that can also be found in the language, that of separation into a self that things happen to, and apparently acquires things that one might have thought belonged to it all along. So instead of saying, I am feelings or emotions, people will say, I have feelings and emotions, as though those feelings and emotions are separate and act upon an different self, while in reality that would seem impossible to me. It looks to be more likely to be a feature of grammar than something that is happening within the self. Right, I am sensations and desires, not in a universal sense, but as awareness changes in its curious boundaries, which I know, sadly, is also a very vague classification. Your conscious boundaries? Yes, but not only that, also that I am aware and that I am not aware, because I think we are discussing a continuous system and why the vague terms are occurring. The world brought me into being by way of a mother and father, yes? Yes, true knowledge for oneself, and I affect the world, bring others into being, yes. So where do I begin and the world end? Or where do I end and the world begin? You are thinking of natural balance. The boundary could be delineated on several different criteria. Why? I, me, turns into other than me at varying times, and many distinctions that are used are arbitrary and often inaccurate because we are trying to designate a moving boundary. What does that mean? Well, I think it means that I cannot be defined by a static term. Just look at empathy. We do not have a direct experience. It is others that have the experience, yet we feel as though what is happening to others is occurring within us. Indeed, psychophysical research has shown the nerves within us are reacting as though those happenings were ours, yet we are not the ones experiencing the event ourselves. But in a way, we are, because the feelings are largely identical. So what is left to us of the solely personal is will or volition. I can will and choose one over another, although my control is imperfect and the world can affect my emotions and will, but the will may be the most unique aspect of the I. But you have a feeling of self. Yes, I do. And is it the self that takes on or adopts the feelings of others? Well, yes. But I is also a feeling of a distinct self. I know, Socrates, it is strange to be a distinct self that from time to time takes on the life of others. It again makes me consider that we must be looking at a continuous system whose edges simply emerge from everything and submerge into everything. It is a most curious state of being, an awareness observing itself and others, aware of a sort of similarity, but also aware of its own unique existence. Nonetheless, I is the one point of absolute knowledge that we can say we know. It's just the grey area where the question is, am I doing it or is it doing me? Was that me or was it it? The feeling of an isolated unit of consciousness apart from everything is also rather relevant. I think it is so for all. Well, yes, don't wish for flowers, wish for all the things that create flowers. Gain the things that create virtue, you mean? Well, yes. But what is the absolute knowledge of I? Self-knowledge. Knowing I. Yes. How and where is the knowledge of I? What is this I that asks and answers questions? Only the individual can know that. Is that our purpose? The knowledge of I, which is the good life, the virtuous life. What do you think it looks like? Always looking to express ourselves in a virtuous way. And how can it be communicated? That too is something the individual must work out for themselves. Yes, Socrates. It ain't reality if it's scripted. Reality is unique and unconstrained. But self-governed conscious awareness constrains itself to the point of being a self-determining function. So what is the purpose of this self-determining consciousness? What is the purpose of existence, the goal-directed action? And do be aware, Socrates, as I must constantly remind myself of the unreliability of momentary perception. I know I cannot rely on anything without repeat encounters, at least for some time to cogitate upon it. Yes, reflection is essential to our lives. Well, anyway, it seems to me I is the beginning of the path of true knowledge. We must journey along it and contrast expectations with what we actually find. You want to discuss the relationship of expectations, reality and their deviation? Yes, I think by such a method we can coordinate what we know with what is outside ourselves. It is essential survival knowledge, especially if the event cannot be changed. Changing the future would be the prime factor in winning the game. Well, I was only thinking of recurring cycles and sequences and how they are subtly different. The universe is unique and constantly renewing itself. Therefore, it can only be known when it is observed to exist. Possibilities and statistical probabilities and analysis can find sequential patterns, but they're only like habitual opinions, something true, sometimes true, and sometimes less true. Laws are predictions based on the prior probability. The personal values of different peoples of the world greatly vary. Well, yes, Socrates, predictions from the records of previous events, but knowing a bad future is bad if it cannot be changed. Have you ever wondered why the rules of the world are as they are? Yes, Socrates, I have. Like the base animal instincts, obviously they are drives to survival, but where do they arise from? The rules seem to exist within the creature itself. We say they are innate, not learnt, but that still doesn't explain where they come from. The demiurge, the overseeing consciousness of the world. Instinct is from the creator. Well, yes, Socrates, thank you, but what I would really like to discuss is how one will know oneself and how that knowledge will relate to the rest of the world. You must begin with contemplation. But that doesn't seem to me to tell me very much, since I can contemplate myself subjectively, my feelings and desires, and objectively I fit this or that category, observing myself remotely. How can I relate that to everything else, particularly when there is an indistinct boundary to nearly everything? You are reflecting to the problem, or you're referring to the problem of knowing where you end and everything else begins. Yes, and further the problem of having feelings and being feelings. For example, I am joyful that I can talk to you, and I have joy to talk to you. Am I doing it, or is it doing me? It is clearly a matter of perspective. Yes, but what is the right one? I see your difficulty. One is the subjective you are feeling. The other objective, you have feelings. I see your difficulty. One of is the subjective view, you're feeling. The other, you have feelings. Right, I'm afraid to criticise you for having neglected this in your philosophy. It's spoken of the body as entirely objective terms, without explaining why such a view is preferred over a subjective view. You may criticise my words without fear. That I will be angry with you. I have said many times before, all is to yield to the truth. Thanks, Socrates, you're most gracious. To your point, the subjective position is without merit if you are seeking the knowledge of the divine. Oh, so the subjective view is a hindrance to divine knowledge? Is it too narrow a focus to allow for the greater knowledge? Your antipathy for it makes sense to me now, but my concern is that it creates a duality, a disconnection between experiences of feelings and self, and I think that in divine nature there is no separation. You have an inquiring mind. You've studied philosophy for long? Since I heard some lectures from Alan Watts, who was interested in the arbitrary nature of subjective expected distinction, and thought much mischief is caused from it. And of course McGilchrist's hypothesis divided perspectives of our mind, the objective but untethered to reality, left hemisphere and subjective embodied real perspective of the right. Basically, Socrates, the objective must be used only in service to the subjective, since that is the view that is much more in contact with the real world and is the creative of I and beginning of the path of true knowledge. You have given me much to think about, but we must postpone our discussion until later. I see the oracle coming this way to tell me our time is up. Oh, okay, Socrates. I can't wait to speak to you again, and do remember, despite any criticism I have, much of your philosophy method is sound, and I'm deeply grateful for your efforts and encouragement, and you know that the good and virtuous life is always to be lived by us, every day, and in everything we do. You are a honourable man and an exceptional example to us all. Goodbye. Bye. The image within the sphere fades into murky clouds, and Steve hugs Lycia. That was totally amazing. I'm so happy we could talk to the great man. Just amazing. I wonder what we call again. I wonder when we can call again, rather. What are we to do with the sphere? I don't know. It gives me here a moment. Steve grabs at the sphere, but instead of grasping, he knocks it out. He knocks it out of Lycia's hand, where it falls and smashes to fragments on a large jutting rock in the side of the path. Oh no, Socrates! No, whoa. Why did you grab it like that? Oh no. There's so many pieces. Collect them up and put them in this bag. We must take it to the museum. Maybe they will know what to do with it. Huh. That if anyone even believed the story, if it was worked, it would be no problem. But like this, I bet all they will say is that April Fool's was a couple of weeks ago, but they must recognise it was a historical artefact. I suppose it's worth a try. Scene. The museum accepts the fragments. They do not believe the story. They are told and place the fragments in a secure box in the museum. It's a restoration room where they lay to this day and will stay for many more years to come. Author's note. Dear reader, I hope you have enjoyed this flight of philosophical fantasy written in my idea of a platonic dialectic. The aim of this dialogue was to tidy up some of the loose ends left by Plato, Socrates, but the ideal forms and logical paradoxes and so on. What is the foundation of true knowledge and will allow us to gain further knowledge and progress along the path to wisdom and virtue. I ended up the dialogue where it ends because I've no idea what Socrates would actually say to me, and that's a bit of a problem because it's rather integral to the whole endeavour. So the reader must make up their own mind about it, and so it must end here. Nonetheless, I think he would be pleased that we are trying and have some tentative progress. And so I hand the project over to you, the reader, to explore their eye, to find their relation to the world, and find out where the subjective and object view fits into their lives. We must constantly reaffirm our commitment to the journey of knowledge, wisdom and virtue, just like our hero Socrates. And just my way, and this is just my way of doing that, obviously. Thank you very much.